I sat in my bay window and watched the kids playing outside for the millionth time. Every night I sat there. I listened to my favorite Billy Joel albums and watched the kids play. I watched Tommy Jones, Danny Frick, and Mark Fisher throw a Nerf football ball to each other. A minute would pass and Jimmy Spellman would come running in from the next street to join them. Jimmy was my son. And I wondered how I could afford to be in a situation where the only way to see my son was through the window. I figured that if my ex-wife, Carrie, had known he was so close, she would have driven him home. Watching him, he would always wave and smile at me. He was 10 years old, so he was old enough to get the gist of what had happened between his mom, me, and her lover. Her exchange. I think the thing that killed me the most was the way she told me about leaving me for Greg. I came home from work on a normal Tuesday and said, "Jim, I'm pregnant." I picked her up in my arms and hugged her, telling her how happy I was. The only problem was that I didn't realize she was crying and didn't hug me back. I set her on the ground and was about to talk about us needing a bigger house when she interrupted me. "It's not yours, Jim. I'm leaving and moving in with Greg Allen." Greg Allen, the neighborhood asshole, the bachelor who drives a fancy Lexus and brings $200 bottles of whiskey to neighborhood parties. Who the hell does that? Just bring a case of beer, man, Jesus. As soon as I realized what she said, I left the house, walked the 2 blocks to Greg's house, and beat the cowboy shit out of him. He, of course, was surprised to see me at his door. I still don't understand why he was surprised. She was moving in with him and had already packed for herself and Jimmy, as I found out later. He should have expected to get his ass kicked. Anyway, the asshole called the police and I ended up getting locked up for the night. Carrie got a restraining order protecting her and Jimmy from me, and a week later I was served with divorce papers. I never got to ask her directly why she cheated on me. The football game ended when Mark was called to dinner and Jimmy kissed me goodbye. I pointed to my mailbox on the curb and smiled when Jimmy opened it. He jumped into the air and shook his fist. I heard him yell, "Yes," as if he was right next to me. I held out my cell phone to him. My ex said he wasn't allowed to have one until he was 12. I agreed with her that he was too young. I just wanted to mess with her and deal with the consequences later. My sister said she would take the blame for giving it to him. He pulled out the note I'd left. "Jimmy, I love you more than anything in the world, but you have to hide the phone. If you get caught with it, tell your mom Aunt Jenny gave it to you. You have unlimited data, so you don't have to connect to Wi-Fi to use it. And I have a card so you can buy games and stuff from the App Store. You also have a music subscription, and I've downloaded all of Billy Joel's music for you, so enjoy. I'm sorry I messed up and can't see you, but I miss you every day. My numbers are programmed, as are Aunt Jenny's and Grandma and Grandpa's. Please don't call my number unless it's an emergency. I'll get in trouble with the police." There's a number programmed under the name Mike. It's my number for another phone that can't be traced. You can text me on that number anytime, but don't call me Dad in your messages. Sorry, buddy, but it's going to be like this for a while. Leave this note in the mailbox. I love you. The smile on his face melted me and I broke down. He crumpled up the note and put it back in the mailbox. He grabbed his phone, headphones, and charger and left the packaging behind. He yelled, "I love you," and ran off. Billy Joel was my favorite rock singer, and Jimmy and I always made fun of him. He said he hated him, but I knew he liked his music. Every once in a while, Jimmy would slip song lyrics into the conversation to see if I would pick up on them. Yeah, it's weird, but it was our thing. I remember when Jimmy got a D on a test and Carrie told him, "You're a straight A student." Jimmy, without wasting a second, replied, "I guess I think too much." I laughed, and Carrie got mad, not realizing that it was a play on the old lyrics to "It's Still Rock and Roll to Me." Like I said, it's weird, but it's our thing. I worked for a construction company as a jack-of-all-trades mechanic. I did everything from small cars to big cranes, and I've been doing it since I got out of high school. It was good money, and I had winter vacation every year, which gave me a nice break. Carrie was a teacher. We met at a country bar and hit it off right away. She never complained that I was a mechanic, and I never complained that she was a teacher. The courtship was casual, and we were married 3 years after we met. We bought a 2-bedroom ranch-style house, planning to move as needed. I guess in her ideas of moving up, I wasn't part of that move. I must have been an idiot because I didn't know she was cheating on me until she told me she was carrying that asshole's baby. Nobody liked him. Guys tolerated him barely, and that was only to drink the Johnny Blue he always showed up with. The ladies avoided him like the plague, I think all but Carrie. I never wanted to know why or how it started, but I was embarrassed to find out. It was clear she needed more than a mechanic as a husband. Never mind that I had a stable union job with a pension and benefits. Hell, she never complained about money. We had a good amount, we went on vacations to Disney, and she bought herself all the clothes she wanted, so I was truly dumbfounded. The only hint that anything had changed was that for a while, until the very end, she disapproved of my work. It didn't matter that I was making more money than she was. No, I had become a grease monkey. I have it. The first time she called me that was when I was wiping my hands after an oil change. She walked past me into the garage, and I grabbed her and pulled her to me to kiss her. I stained her cheap cotton t-shirt, and she was furious. Damn it, Jim. It's a new t-shirt, and you ruined it. I laughed. Baby, it's a $5 t-shirt from Walmart. I'll buy you a dozen for another hug and kiss. I leaned in, and she pushed me away. Hurry up and finish it, you fat monkey. I have to go to the store. After that, she started calling me monkey when she addressed me. She called me by my first name to my face, but I quickly grew bored with the barb. She had been living with Greg for a few months now, and the divorce had just been finalized when I handed Jimmy the phone. The restraining order had been contested by my lawyer, but I'd screwed up and violated it by kicking Greg in the balls when he dared show up at my neighbor's barbecue with his family in his arms. I knew I should leave, but as I left, I hugged Jimmy, and Greg made a shitty remark about the growing baby and Carrie's belly being his, and called me a bitch. I lost my temper and kicked him in the crotch with all my might. Luckily, my neighbor and his wife told the cops that Greg was stopping me from leaving. I was not arrested for the kicking or for violating the restraining order. However, at the next hearing, they used the incident to prove that they still needed the restraining order. A month after I gave him my phone, we exchanged texts every day. They didn't include declarations of love or mention that I was his father, but I was aware of his daily life, which was what I wanted. I was surprised he hadn't been caught doing it yet, but we were having a good time. One night I heard the landline phone ring and it surprised me. I had never gotten a call on it, only messages from Jimmy. Jimmy, you shouldn't be calling. Daddy, help, he yelled. Greg was hitting Mom and pushed me. I got a cut on my head from hitting the door. I tried to help her, Dad, but Jimmy, I'm on my way. Get out of the house if you can. Run over here. I'll call the police to help your mom. He didn't answer. Instead, I heard rustling and Greg's screams. I rushed to run toward their house. Screw the restraining order. I had to help my son. I forgot to call 911, but I still made it to his house quickly. I kicked in the front door and saw Jimmy crawling under the dining room table, trying to avoid Greg, who was trying to grab him. I saw Carrie lying on the floor in the hallway. She was moving, trying to get up, but she was having no luck. I hoped her almost premature baby was okay, and then I wondered why I didn't care. Greg pounced on me in a rage. He clumsily tried to grab my shoulder. I dodged and pushed him through the door and onto the steps. He fell to the sidewalk, rolling on the grass and looking dazed. Jimmy, shouted I, call 911 and tell them we need the police. Okay. Keeping my eyes on Greg, I felt a touch on my shoulder. I turned around, ready to strike, but it was Carrie. Jim, stay away from me. I'm having a hard enough time saving Jimmy from your piece of shit, or should I say man? She wrinkled her nose and stepped back. Go check on Jimmy, he's bleeding. I told him to call 911. Make sure he does. She gasped and limped away, crying. She was in pain, and I felt like shit for being mean to her, but it wasn't my fault Greg lost his temper. I watched as he sat down on the lawn and passed out again. I smiled, thinking that he must have hit his head hard on the sidewalk. It occurred to me that I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the house, so I walked a few houses down. I decided I was perfectly capable of following that stupid order, even though I'd already broken it by helping Jimmy. I kicked Greg in the balls as I passed him. I was starting to like doing that. Trey Jackson, Greg's neighbor, laughed and followed me while his wife, Siona, went into the house to take care of Carrie and Jimmy. Another neighbor I didn't know was making sure Greg stayed put. What's wrong, Jim? He asked when I stopped and sat down on the grass about 200 feet from the house. Jimmy called me for help and said Greg hit Carrie and pushed him. I ran over to help. Jesus, we heard the screams but had no idea he hit them. I'm so sorry. Don't worry about it. Then I laughed and said, I didn't even have time to hit the bastard. He jumped me, and I just shoved him out the door. We laughed together, and then the police arrived with an ambulance. Trey, would you mind telling the cops what happened? Let them know I'm staying here because of the court order. Sure, Jim. I hope everything's going to be okay. We all know you didn't deserve what happened. Thanks, man. I watched the cops talk to Trey, another neighbor, and an already awake Greg. Trey pointed at me as one of the cops cuffed Greg and put him in the car. Carrie was carried out on a stretcher, and Jimmy came out holding Zion's hand with a bandage on his forehead. One of the officers gave me the finger, and I complied. He met me halfway and asked, Are you Jim Spellman? Yes, sir. What happened? I told him everything, and he took notes. While all this was going on, the ambulance left and the car with Greg drove off. Is my son okay? He put his hand on my shoulder and said, I think so. They're going to check him for a concussion and other possible problems related to the head injury. I nodded as he continued. Mr. Spellman, I think we have to take you away because of the violation of the court order. I am awaiting a final ruling on this matter. Do you understand? Yes. I was supposed to help Jimmy, officer. Screw that piece of paper. His radio beeped and he stepped away from me. I'll never understand how they can communicate with those things. It looks like Charlie Brown's teacher to me. He turned to me and said, Your ex-wife refused to consider an order. Since what you did appears to us to be self-defense, you're free to go for now. Things could change if the guy presses charges and they decide to have a judge handle it. Go home. Don't go to the hospital. Yes, sir, I said, and went home, hoping Jimmy was okay. For a fleeting moment, I hoped Carrie was okay too, but I pushed that thought away. The next morning, I called my lawyer to let him know what had happened. He told me to do nothing and not to contact either Jimmy or Carrie. You'll be lucky if that asshole doesn't press charges, was his last word. I guess kicking down his door didn't look too good for me, self-defense or not. I couldn't sleep worrying about Jimmy, so I called in sick to work. I also called my mom to see if Jimmy was okay. She was able to get in touch with Carrie and called me back to let me know they were both okay. Carrie stayed at the hospital to make sure the baby was okay, and Jimmy was picked up by Carrie's mom and dad. I always liked her parents. They were good people who took my side during the divorce. Her dad, Dan, forbade Carrie from bringing Greg into their house. They also kept me informed of some of the important events going on in Jimmy's life. I don't know if Carrie knew about it or not. Later that morning, I received a call from my attorney informing me that Greg had not been released on bail and would be in a holding cell until his trial. I think the aggravating circumstances, Carrie's pregnancy and the fact that he had hurt Jimmy, reduced his chances of bail. I was surprised when he told me that Carrie's attorney had filed a motion to lift the protective order against me. I would be notified of a court date for that. I fell to my knees and burst into tears, realizing that I would soon be able to hug my son again. Carrie called me several times over the next 2 weeks. I wasn't going to risk ruining my relationship with the court, so I didn't return her calls. She left no messages other than asking me to talk to her. When court time came, I got a haircut, bought a new suit, and shaved off my beard. I needed to make as favorable an impression as possible, and I didn't want to look like I'd been living in the woods for 6 months. The judge didn't play games and didn't just sign a dismissal of the case. She asked a lot of questions, and most of them had to do with why it was safe for me to be around then, and not before. I felt like she was trying to figure out if Carrie was lying or if I was coercing her. Thankfully, after all her questions were cleared up, she rescinded the order and I was able to see my son again. Carrie came up to me as we were leaving the courtroom and said, "Thank you for coming to our rescue that night. If you hadn't come, I don't think the police would have gotten here in time. I think he would have killed me. That's how enraged he was." Yeah? Well, I would never let my son get hurt. I would never have put down. Don't say that, Jim. I know it's all my fault. He wouldn't have been hurt if he hadn't been in that monster's house. She didn't finish her thought. She ran away, crying. Jim, my lawyer said, I'll contact her attorney to arrange a visitation schedule. Congratulations. You can see him now. I walked out of the courthouse, and if I had been in a cartoon, I would have been floating in the air. I was so happy. I couldn't wait to see Jimmy. As I was walking to my car in the parking lot, I heard Jimmy yell, "Daddy!" I turned around and he was already climbing out of Carrie's dad's truck. He ran to me and jumped into my open arms. I hugged him so tightly that he asked me to let him catch his breath. Dan came over as I was hugging him and said, "I'm sorry, Jim. I tried to get here faster, but traffic sucked." "That's okay. I'm glad you brought him." "Where's Carrie?" he asked. "I don't know. She ran away after the trial and I think she's gone." "Yeah, Jim, why don't you take him with you for the rest of the day? Maybe we can have dinner together and catch up." I frowned. "I'm not sure I can do that. We don't have a visiting schedule." "She might." "She doesn't mind," I heard behind me. I turned around. Tears were streaming down Carrie's cheeks. "Come on, let's spend some time together," she said. "If you want, I'll bring an overnight bag and he can stay the night." "May I?" Jimmy asked. She nodded, and I thanked her. At the sight of her, my heart twinged. I felt so sorry for her at that moment, and I don't know why. I guess I hated seeing her cry. I knew that some part of me still loved her. It was just buried deep under the ice, covering my heart. Since it was summer, Jimmy was out of school. I took a few days off and spent as much time with him as I could. Carrie was being gracious, and I knew she was sorry for what had happened. She moved out of Greg's house and into her parents' house. I wondered how it would go with the baby and didn't realize it right away. She went into labor, and while she was on her way to the hospital, I asked if Jimmy could stay with me for a few days or a week. Jane, her mother, brought Jimmy over and said she would let me know how it went. I didn't care about her illegitimate child, and I made that clear to Jane. She wasn't happy with my attitude, but she understood. 8 hours later, my life was turned upside down again. Dan called me and said, "Jim, she had a beautiful baby girl. You have to come here and see her." I sighed and said, "Dan, I don't care about her baby. I'm glad he's healthy, but..." "Jim, shut up and come here now. Jane and I will watch Jimmy in the waiting area. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, and if you're not here in half an hour, I'll come and get your ass over here myself." The line cut off and I stood there wondering what the hell was going on. I called Jimmy and told him we were going to the hospital. He got excited, probably wanted to see his new sister, but I wasn't sure he'd be allowed to. We walked past the gift store and Jimmy asked, "Dad, can we buy her a teddy bear?" I was about to say no, but then I realized he was referring to his sister. I let him pick one and he was happy. We raised a good kid. Too bad Carrie ruined our family. Dan and Jane were waiting for us and smiled when they saw Jimmy carrying a pink bear cub. "Thanks for coming, son," Dan said. "I had no choice, Dan." Jane laughed and said, "She's in room 1812. Allison was just brought in for a feeding." I sighed. Carrie had named her after my mom, and I wasn't thrilled about it. I nodded and walked down the long maze of hallways. When I reached her door, I heard her singing softly to the baby. I was pierced with sadness. It was the same lullaby she used to sing to Jimmy when he was very small. Lullaby, Good Night, My Angel, by, you guessed it, Billy Joel. Damn her. When I pulled myself together and finally entered the room, I nearly fainted. The baby had the brightest red hair I'd ever seen on a newborn. Carrie didn't have red hair, and neither did Greg. I have red hair. When Jimmy was born with blonde hair like his mother, I researched how it affects a child that one parent has red hair and the other does not. We both had to carry the gene, and the odds were 50-50ths if only one parent had red hair. A child could have red hair if neither parent had red hair, but there was only a 25% chance of that happening if both were carriers of the gene. I brushed the thought aside and continued on my way to the room. Carrie forced herself to smile through her tears and said, "I think I made a mistake, Jim." I looked at her, shook my head, and left the room. When I got back to the waiting area, Jane said, "It's yours, Jim. You can see that, can't you?" I snorted. "Prove it." Dan laughed. "That's why you're here, son. They've already given orders to the lab for you to turn in saliva or whatever they do to test your DNA. You just have to go downstairs and do it." I shook my head. "It's not going to change anything." She broke my heart. "It means everything, Jim," Jane pondered. "Everything." 3 days later, Jimmy was eating cereal when I walked into the kitchen. "Any plans for today, Daddy?" "Just the usual Saturday stuff, buddy. Mow the grass, clean up the garage, maybe even wash the car if I'm feeling froggy." "Why?" "I was hoping you'd take me to visit Allison." I looked up from my coffee and he got nervous. Carrie was leaving the hospital that morning. I wondered if he knew that. I understand you don't want to visit her, Dad. You can just take me to Grandpa's and not come by. I fake smiled and said, Sure. If you want to spend time with your mom and little sister, I understand. Dad, I was wondering why you don't want to see her. Allison, I mean. Do you know why your mom and I split up? Because she wanted to be with that asshole. I laughed and said, Right. Allison is their kid, not mine. Are you sure? I mean, she has red hair. Doesn't that mean she's your daughter? I sighed. I took a test to find out. I'll probably find out today or Monday. Jimmy looked sad but then smiled. If she's your daughter, will you love her? Wow, I wasn't prepared for the Inquisition to get to this point. I love you, son. If Allison becomes my daughter, I will love her just as much. What about Mom? He asked. I laughed and filled my mug. I'm sure your mom will love her either way. Yeah, I meant, will you love your mom? I didn't even bother to think about the answer. Your mom hurt me the worst pain a wife can inflict on her husband, Jimmy. She got pregnant and left me for another man. The love I used to have for your mom is gone. She left me. Dad, that night you helped us wasn't the first time he hurt Mom. What do you mean? I was shocked. I've heard him hit her before, and they yelled a lot. A tear rolled from Jimmy's eyes. I hugged him and asked him, I was never told what the fight was about, do you know? Because of you. He was always belittling you. Mom told him to shut up and said he wasn't half the man you are. I'm sorry about all that, son. She chose him over me, and she'll have to live with that for the rest of her life. Believe me, if I had known you were in danger, I would have done everything I could to protect you. And your grandparents, too. Why did she do that, Dad? I let him go and we sat down. I think she didn't want to be married to a mechanic. She wanted a colorful life with nice cars and a nice house. She wasn't satisfied with what I could give her anymore. That's silly. I laughed and said, Sometimes adults make stupid choices, buddy. We're only human. He smirked and said, Don't forget your second wind? I looked up. Excuse me? You figure it out yourself, he said, and jumped up from his chair. I'm going to go get dressed. He was out of the room before I realized it, and I knew I was in for a battle if he wanted me to take his mom back. I hadn't expected this, daughter or not. Damn Billy Joel. As I led Jimmy to the door, Jane, with Allison in her arms, answered. Hey, Jim. Have you heard from the doctor yet? No, I replied, trying not to look at the beautiful baby girl in her arms. Grandma, can I hold her? Jimmy asked. Of course, baby girl, but you have to sit up. That way I can safely carry her into your arms. Babies are very fragile. Okay. He ran into the house and she laughed at his enthusiasm. Come on in, Jim. I'll get you a cup of coffee. No thanks, Jane. I've got some chores to do around the house. I'll come back and get it when it's ready. She frowned, but I didn't care. I couldn't be around Carrie and I certainly didn't want to get attached to a baby. Well, not until I got that damn DNA test. As if karma was trying to play a joke on me, I got the call as we stood on the porch. I'll take the baby inside and leave you two alone, she said. Jim Spellman, I answered. Mr. Spellman, this is Amy from the lab at St. Alex. We have the results of your DNA test. I took a deep breath, not sure if I wanted to know or not. Okay, what's the verdict? A positive match. We can confirm your origins to the exact... I interrupted her and hit the end button. I lowered myself onto the swing that stood in front of the large window that overlooked the courtyard. I couldn't believe that bitch was pregnant with my baby when she left me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. I wanted to run. But I knew I couldn't do any of those things. I needed air. I'd been outside before, but the air wasn't any fresher. It was like someone was sitting on my chest, and the next thing I realized was that I was crying. Not sobbing, but tears were running down my cheeks. I had no idea what to do, and I wasn't sure I could do anything at all. I felt helpless. I don't know how much time passed, but I felt a touch on my shoulder. Dan asked, Jim, are you okay, son? I continued to stare into space and replied, I'll never be okay. How could she do this to me? I loved her with everything I had. He sat next to me in silence. He didn't know what to say. And who could know what to say at that moment? Was that the lab calling? Jane said you got a call. Yes, it was the lab. I walked away from the answer I knew he was looking for. I couldn't find the words to admit that I was a father again. A father to a little girl whose mother had left me for a richer man. A father whose wife left him for a better man who beat her and tried to hurt my son. A father whose children couldn't live with him. Jim? I... I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell him the outcome. Jim, he repeated, putting his hand on my shoulder. It's obvious to everyone but you that she's yours. Do you really need them to confirm that? I stood up and shouted, Yes, yes, they had to confirm it. How could I trust that damn whore you raised? As soon as the words flew from my lips, I regretted saying them. I had just destroyed this good man for no reason other than anger at her. He didn't deserve that. I'm sorry, Dan, please? No, I know I couldn't handle her. It broke my heart when you two broke up. I know I never had a son, and when I handed her over to you that day at church, I was so happy you were part of the family. I love you like you popped out of Jane. Dan, I'm so sorry, I know, and I feel the same way about you and Jane. I'm just so angry with her right now. She was pregnant with my baby when she left me to switch with a piece of shit. I don't know what to do. He stood up and hugged me. Son, he said, stepping back, the first thing you need to do is call your parents and invite them here for lunch. They need to meet their new grandson. I will, but I can't stay. I can't see her now. I can't look her in the eye after what she's done to me and to this little girl who deserves a father. Out of the blue, he slapped me across the face. Not hard, but it hurt. That little girl has a father. And it's you, damn it. Don't you ever say anything like that in my presence again. I nodded, shocked. Of course. I'm just in a state of shock right now. It's been an emotional week. Son, in crazy situations like we have here, emotions get out of control. I realize you need time and space to come to your senses. Call your parents and ask them to come over. You can go and do what you have to do, but know that at some point you will have to come to Jesus and meet your baby girl. I dialed my mom's number on my phone and waited. Hey Jim, how's... Mom, could you and Dad come over to Dan and Jane's for lunch today? Carrie had a baby and she's your granddaughter. What? Yes, she's my little girl. I started crying again. Reality kept hitting my eyes and I couldn't dodge the blows. Jesus, Jim, I'll get your father and we'll be right there. Thanks, Mom. They're waiting for you. I finished speaking and looked at Dan. Do you think I can hold her? He smiled and said, Sure, come on in. No, I can't see Carrie. Can I just sit here with her? Me, Jimmy, and Allison? Sure, I'll go get them. I sat down on the swing and waited. I was starting to shake with nerves. I changed my mind and was about to leave when Jane came out and handed me Allison. My Allison. She was asleep and didn't move when they put her in my arms. I took her in my arms and gently rocked the swing. Jimmy lagged behind for a few seconds and jumped on the swing the way only a 10-year-old boy can do. Isn't she pretty, Daddy? She could be Batgirl for Halloween. We all laughed and I said, You bet. You could be Batman and she could be Batgirl or Poison Ivy. Both were red-headed comic book heroines. As if on cue, she woke up and started crying. Looks like someone's hungry, Jane said. I'll take her, Carrie said from the doorway. I didn't even notice her presence. I'm sorry, Jim. She's breastfeeding and I haven't decanted a single bottle or else... No, it's okay. I kissed my daughter's forehead and handed her to her mother. I was about to say goodbye when my parents pulled up in the driveway. My mom practically ran into the house and it was obvious she was crying. She's being fed, Jane said as she hugged her. Come in and meet her. My father laughed as he walked over to her. She's been half crying and half fussing since she talked to you on the phone. I didn't put my shoes on fast enough. I didn't drive fast enough. She was cussing all the way through because of every stoplight we passed. She's like a puddle right now. Dan shook his hand and said, Al, we got a goddamn puddle here. My dad threw him a no-shit Sherlock look, turned to me and said, Well, I'm sure it'll all work out. Right, Jim? I have no idea, Dad. Back home, I got busy with yard work, but I couldn't take my mind off my daughter and what I had to do. I knew I needed to call my lawyer and let him know that I needed to arrange visitation with both kids, not just Jimmy. I knew I would have to pay more child support, but that issue didn't bother me. I would always support my children. After mowing the grass, I walked into the house and looked around the kitchen. It seemed like I had just taken all the childproofing off the cabinets and now I would have to put it back on. I was glad I had saved all those little things in a box in the attic. I realized that I would have to take apart the crib and other baby furniture that we kept and Carrie kept for herself. I guess her best man could afford new things for the baby, so why use the old stuff we inherited? I didn't like that Jimmy would have to share a room with the baby when they came to visit, and my room wasn't big enough to put a crib in there, so it would have to be put in the family room. Maybe I'll have to get a bigger house after all, I thought. I cleaned up the house a bit. I'd forgotten what a mess a boy could make after Jimmy had been gone so long. Cleaning had never given me so much pleasure. I was just settling into my favorite patio chair with a cold beer when the gate opened. "Are you here, Jim?" Dad called out to me. He and Dan walked around my house and sat down across from me. "Can I get you guys a beer?" I didn't wait for an answer, realizing that if they were alone in my house, then this was serious business and they needed a drink. I went into the house and pulled out a cooler bag with the 11 bottles of beer I had left from the 12-pack. "Okay, guys, give me that," I said. Dad laughed and said, "You think we came here for a heavy conversation or something?" "Something like that," I snorted. "It's not that bad, Jim," Dan said. "We know your mind is in a daze, in shock, and probably 100 other things we can't describe. We know you've gone from blissful ignorance, abandonment, lack of contact with your boy to a newly minted father. Son, that would crush a weaker man." "Jim," my father said with a grim look, "you're going to be a father to this little girl, we know that." I nodded, waiting to see where he was going with this, and I didn't like the look or sound of what had happened so far. "Have you given any thought to your relationship with Carrie?" I laughed. Not a giggle, not a cheeky laugh. I laughed at the top of my voice. "There is no relationship with Carrie, Dad. She threw me out deciding she'd found a better option. What are you waiting for? You think I'm going to run to Dan and Jane, pick her up and bring her home like she's on a trip? Are you out of your mind?" "No, Jim. Not a chance in hell. Do you understand? Not one, 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 not one. I'm not the one for her, and having another baby with me won't change that." "She thought it was his child. That's why she went to him," Dan said, defending his slut daughter. "Are you listening to yourself?" I don't know if I was foaming at the mouth, but I'm sure saliva was flying in all directions as I yelled at them. "She thought it was his baby. How could she allow the possibility of having a child with another man if she didn't do it with him before she left me? She cheated on me, and who knows for how long. She betrayed me. She broke my heart into bloody pieces and threw them outside to the garbage man. Just because Allison is my child doesn't change that." "Jim, we get it. You don't understand a damn thing. She wanted to switch. She wanted a fancy Lexus and a landscaped yard, trips to Europe and Mexican beaches. She screwed up and picked the wrong guy. If she thinks she can resort to me as plan B, let her forget it." I turned around and walked into the house. I locked the sliding door and closed the blinds, hoping they'd take the hint and leave me alone. I hated yelling at those two, but I couldn't take it anymore. Next chapter. I hadn't heard from them to pick Jimmy up, and the time was getting close to lunchtime. I didn't know if I should call or just come get him. I didn't feel like getting behind the wheel and waiting for him to get ready to leave. I wasn't ready to meet them, and neither was Carrie. That issue was resolved when I got a text from Jane. "We're taking Jimmy to the Red Robin for dinner. You can join us and drive him home from there." I didn't even think about the fact that Carrie and the baby were going with them. Who would take a 3-day-old infant to eat with them? So I decided to join them. What's the worst that could happen? I figured Jimmy would be a good buffer and keep us from getting too deep into Carrie's future. I didn't expect the little Judas named after me to go on the attack. When I walked into the restaurant, I saw them sitting and digging into a tower of onion rings. The sight made me smile, but also sad at the same time. Jimmy always insisted on onion rings when we went as a family. "Hey guys," I said, smiling as I sat down at the table. Everyone was in a good mood and the conversation flowed easily. Things changed after dinner. "Dad," Jimmy began, "I think we need a bigger house." I laughed and said, "That's what I thought. I can't imagine you and your sister sharing a bedroom when you come to visit." "No." "Jimmy, calm down," Jane chided. "We need a bigger house so Mom and Allison can move in and we can all be together again. I don't want to go back to Greg's house." "Son, you're never going back there except to get your stuff," I said. "He's going to jail." He smiled radiantly and said, "Thank God. I missed my old room and our house." Dan frowned and said, Jimmy, didn't your mom tell you? You, your mom and Allison are going to stay with us for a while. Your mom will find a new home for you very soon. If that's the case, I want to stay with Dad. Why can't I do that? Jimmy, it's complicated, I said. The judge gave custody of you to your mom. I'm very lucky that your mom is letting you spend the last few days in the next week with me. That's not fair, Daddy. Why do I have to suffer? I looked at Dan and Jane for help and saw that, from the look in their eyes, I was alone. Parents versus grandparents, I guessed. Jimmy, you're too young to realize this, but it's not fair to me either. One day I had a beautiful family, and the next day I lost you, your mom, and my whole life. Jimmy, I lost everything I loved. With one sentence from your mom. When she told me that asshole, i.e. Greg, got her pregnant and she was leaving me, she broke me. Too bad. Jimmy, Dan and Jane shouted in unison. Now they've intervened, I thought. She knew she made a mistake. That's why they had the fight. He was a jerk who lied to her all the time. Whenever he slapped her, she'd sleep with me and tell me she missed you too. She made a mistake, Dad. Like the song says, she's only human. She has a second chance. I shook my head. The revelation that she missed me living with that jerk was a new development, but I couldn't let Jimmy think we had a chance at his fantasies. Jimmy, the song isn't about giving someone a second chance. It's about not giving up and trying again when you fail. As soon as the words flew off my lips, I knew what he was going to say, and he didn't disappoint. See? You give up. You don't try again. I took his hand and said, Son, if I could go back in time and change what I did to make her leave me, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I loved your mom more than anything in the world. When you came along, my life became complete. I had everything I could ever need. I had the world hanging by a thread, and your mom cut that thread. I'm not saying this to make you mad at her. She loves you as much as she never has and never will. I'm telling you this so you can understand how I feel and why I can't just take her back. Dan spoke up. Well, I guess we should call it a day. It's been a long day. I looked up and nodded. That's a good idea. Let's go home, Jimmy. Jimmy didn't calm down. We had a conversation like this once a day while he was with me. Eventually, he tried a different tactic and became more polite and dispassionate. But it still didn't help. 10 days after Allison was born, Carrie showed up on my doorstep. Hi, Jim. Can I come in? I waved and called out to her, Jimmy, your mom's here. When he burst into the room, it was like a herd of elephants running through my little house. Hi, Mom, he shouted, nearly knocking her over with his hug. Where's Allison? She's visiting Grandma and Grandpa Spellman. Oh, good. He ran off to his bedroom. I turned around and asked, Are you here to take him home? I'll go get him ready. No, Jim. I'm here to talk to you, if that's okay with you. I don't think I hid my frown well enough as I gestured for her to sit down. Can I get you something to drink? I asked, feeling awkward about her sitting in the same room with me. No, thank you. Jim, due to circumstances, I didn't get a chance to talk to you before the divorce. Circumstances? You mean that shitty restraining order you put on me that almost cost me my job? She frowned and looked away. That was Greg's idea. He wanted revenge for your assault, and… Assault? Jesus, you have some serious reality perception issues. It wasn't an assault, it was revenge. He took my wife and I had to act. You didn't have to kick him at the barbecue. Probably not, but he also didn't need to tell me I was trashy in Jimmy's presence when I tried to leave and comply with your court order. You knew I was going to be at that party. You shouldn't have gone there. She looked away again and said, You know, he was in trouble after that punch. You probably tore a blood vessel or something. He never told me what happened. I laughed, and I can't recall a time when I've laughed harder. It took a few minutes before I calmed down enough for her to continue what she wanted to say. Get to the point, Carrie. While I appreciate what you've been doing for a year with this information, I'd like you to leave as soon as possible. She sighed and continued. You keep telling my parents that I'm changing with Greg. That's not true. I was about to object when she held up her hand. I know I called you a grease monkey, and maybe it gave you that impression. I apologize for that. I have no complaints about your work. I never have. I know you are an excellent mechanic who is highly respected by your coworkers. Unfortunately, Greg always called you a grease monkey, and I treated you with disdain. You have no idea how much I regret that. Whether I believed her or not, the look on my face said I didn't. I mean it. I'm sorry for being so disrespectful to you. Whatever you say, Carrie. Apology accepted. Anything else? Yes, plenty. I stood up and said, then I need a beer. I didn't bother to ask if she wanted anything else. The time for hospitality was long gone. When I returned to the living room, she was pacing like a death row inmate. Well then, I said, get down to business. No, she held up the picture of the first time we took Jimmy to Disneyland. Remember how excited he was when he realized we were at Disneyland? I'll never forget that moment of sheer joy we all experienced. I nodded while a tear rolled from her eye. I never loved Greg. In my hormone-clouded mind, I was pregnant with his child, so I had to be with him to raise him. My mind was such a mess that I didn't even think about the fact that she could be your child. I don't even remember doing that with you while he and I were having an affair. I laughed. I don't know if I found the outrage she was talking about funny or if the memory of us doing it had knocked her out. It was just before Christmas. You came home from shopping with my sister and opened a few bottles of wine. She passed out on the couch and I carried you to bed. I'm not surprised you don't remember anything. You were very drunk. She nodded her head. I notice you're trying to blame the divorce on hormones. It certainly wasn't hormones that got you into his bed. She shook her head negatively. To my eternal shame, I bought into his illusions and allowed myself to be seduced by him. If it's any consolation, the affair was short-lived. The first time was on Black Friday. After that, I met him every Saturday morning when you left for work. We stopped when you went on winter break before New Year's. We started again when you went back to work at the end of February. And by St. Patrick's Day, you found out you were pregnant and left me. I found out I was pregnant in February. I decided that Allison was Greg's baby and I had to tell him. He was so excited that he started planning our life for when I would leave you. Up until that point, I hadn't even considered leaving you for him. He convinced me that we were good together and I should divorce you and let him raise my child. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life, much stupider than what I did to him the first time. I crossed my legs and leaned back in my chair. So? Jim, I never stopped loving you. I acted stupid and messed up our lives, but I never stopped loving you for a minute. Yeah? You loved me every Saturday when you hired a babysitter to watch Jimmy so you could entertain the bastard? Did you love me when you said you were divorcing me? That doesn't sound like love to me. She began to sob. Okay, Carrie. You've told me your story. Now you can go. She shook her head in refusal and whispered, please give me a second chance for Allison's sake. Okay, you should go now. I appreciate you letting Jimmy stay with me more than you can imagine, but I can't listen to nonsense about you coming back. It's not going to happen. I couldn't blame her for asking. She was in the shit without a paddle after losing her lover. She could only hope I loved her enough to forgive her and take her back. I knew I still loved her to some extent, but I couldn't imagine myself accepting her back. And it didn't matter how many people, including my son, thought I should do it. Next chapter. I sat by the window, listening to Billy Joel and watching Jimmy play. I reflected on how my life had changed in the last 2 weeks. I should have been happy just having Jimmy back in my life, but things had turned out differently. I had a daughter that I never got to fall in love with while she was in the womb, but I fell in love as soon as I saw her. The problem was that when she was only a week old, I never got to see her. I couldn't imagine there would be such an emptiness in my heart for my baby Allison. I really wanted to go to Carrie's parents and see her, but I didn't want to see my ex, especially after she begged me to give her a second chance. The day before, I had gotten a call from an attorney who had drawn up a standard visitation schedule for both kids and a modified child support agreement. They had to coordinate it with Carrie's attorney, or we would have to go to court again. I hoped Carrie would be civil and not drag me to court, but I guessed it wouldn't go painlessly. My only leverage was her desire for a second chance, and I dashed her hopes of that. Hi, Daddy, shouted Jimmy, running into the house. Am I supposed to go back to Grandma and Grandpa's house today? Yes, your sister has a suitable schedule now, and your mom has gotten into a rhythm so she can take care of you both now. Why can't I stay here? We've talked about this before, Jimmy. Your mom has taken custody of you and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just happy I can see you now. Me too, but what about Allison? We'll get that sorted out soon. I want to see her as much as I wanted to see you when I couldn't. What's for dinner? I laughed at my kid's ability to change the topic of conversation to food. How about grilled steaks? He frowned and asked, how about we go get pizza? We can pick up Allison on the way. Allison can't have pizza yet, buddy. She'll be breastfeeding for a long time yet. Okay, then we can take Mom with us so she can feed Allison. I shook my head. I know what you're trying to do. Jimmy, it's not going to happen. Your mom left me for another man. We'll never be together again. Whatever you say. He ran off to his room. I hoped the guy would soon realize that what he wanted wasn't going to happen. I pulled up to Dan's house and intended to walk Jimmy to the door and see Allison. Since I couldn't spend time with her, I needed to make use of every scrap of time I could. Hey, Jim, Dan said as he opened the door. Jimmy ran past him, quickly exchanging fists. Hey, Dan. I hope to see Allison at least a little. She's just been put to bed, but you know babies. She's probably still wriggling around. Come on in. He led me into the spare bedroom where Allison's crib stood, and Carrie sat in a rocking chair in the corner. I couldn't make her out in the darkness of the room, but she said a whispered hello to me. I nodded and whispered, I just wanted to see her a little, if you don't mind. It's okay. Look closely because pretty soon you won't be seeing her again. What? I asked louder than I should have, but the baby didn't move. Carrie, what are you talking about? Dan asked. It's simple, Dad. If Jim doesn't give me a second chance, I'll never let him visit her or Jimmy. I'll fight like hell and do whatever it takes to make sure he never sees one of his kids. I was about to yell at her when Dan put a hand on my shoulder. Don't say anything you'll regret later or that she can use against you. I'm a witness to everything that happens in this room, and I'm not going to stand by and let her do this. I'm going to find the best father's rights attorney in the state, and we're going to fight her to the last man. Carrie stood up and said, Dad, if you continue to stop my family from staying together, I will cut you out of my life and you will never see your grandchildren again. Are you out of your mind? Jane said, entering the room. I heard everything you said on the baby monitor. If you think you can blackmail him into taking you back, you're in for a rough ride. Carrie, I'm begging you. Don't start a war you've already lost. Let's discuss this in the kitchen, Dan interjected. He probably sensed my impending outburst. They all left the room, and I spent a few extra seconds with my baby girl. I put my finger in her tiny hand and almost cried when her little fingers reflexively wrapped around it. She was so beautiful. I couldn't imagine my life without her. I walked into the kitchen and heard an argument. It wasn't so much an argument as it was Dan and Jane berating Carrie for being stupid. Jim, don't worry about a thing, Dan said. You're not here alone, I can promise you that. Carrie, where did all this come from? You divorced me. You made your choice. You're going to have to live with it. She frowned, and a tear fell into her eye. I made a mistake. You have to forgive me and rebuild our family. Carrie, I sighed. Your mistake was the affair that caused you to divorce me. Oh, please. You act like you're an innocent player in our little drama. If you had spent more time with me, I never would have fallen into the arms of another man. When you worked overtime, worked weekends, came home too tired to do anything unrelated to Jimmy, where were you for me? How many times have you fallen asleep in your chair watching TV shows? How many times did you make love to me in those 6 months before I succumbed to that asshole's charms? I see, I said, not realizing there was a problem between us. So instead of talking to me and telling me how you felt, you were having fun with the jerk next door. I realize you left me thinking you were having his baby. You were already dating by then, but it was a conscious decision to have fun with him the first time. You should have talked to me. I won't deny that what happened was my fault, but you did the worst thing to him and I can't forgive that. She turned away and I continued. Carrie, you robbed me of all that time with my son because that asshole told you to get a restraining order against me. How do you think I can forgive that? How can I forget all those nights when I sobbed and fell asleep wondering if I would ever see my son again? And now you want to take him away from me again, along with my daughter? It's not going to end well. It won't end well for the children. We can't go forward in war mode. For their sake, we have to be able to get along. I'm sorry, but that doesn't mean reconciling with you and forgetting that you left me. She began to sob, and Jane put her arms around her. Honey, please don't punish Jim anymore. He doesn't deserve what you're doing to him. You ripped his heart out and you're trying to do it again. It's over, honey. Carrie got upset again and ducked her head into Jane's shoulder. I looked at her, at Dan standing behind her with his hand on her back and silently waved goodbye. I'd had enough, and apparently so had she. I just hoped she would do the right thing. I knew I would call my lawyer first thing Monday to be as vigilant as possible. I cracked open a beer and decided I needed to get off my ass and get back into the dating scene. It was more than clear to me that I wasn't going to go out with Carrie again, blackmail or not, and I needed to meet someone. At that point, I decided to go out and see what I could find on the dating scene. Having not gone on a date in over a decade, I knew I was in for a shock as I had no idea how to talk to the woman I was interested in. I showered and ordered an Uber, figuring I would figure things out as I went along. I looked through my closet and realized I needed a closet update. How much more cliched could I be? A divorced man with no decent clothes. I decided to call my sister and ask her to go shopping with me. She always picked out clothes for me before Carrie, and I was sure she would do it again. I picked out a pair of khaki shorts and a golf shirt. There was probably some irony in Carrie buying this outfit for me, but I didn't care. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I liked what I saw. I was in good shape, had a full head of hair and a 3-day stubble on my cheeks. Putting all that together with a steady job and money in the bank, I decided I was a pretty good catch. I put on my canvas sneakers and was ready to travel. I decided to head to the local sports bar. It probably wasn't the best option for finding single women, but I didn't think I was ready for the club or country-style dance bar where I met Carrie. I was glad I'd made that choice since there were a couple friends there. "Holy shit!" shouted Jack from his table, causing everyone to turn and look at me. I walked over and gave Jack and his table mates, Alan and Chris, a brotherly hug. I'd known these guys from way back, but marriage and kids had kept us from maintaining close relationships. They were all single guys, and as any married person can realize, single guys fall out of a married guy's friend group after a while, for various reasons. "What's up, men?" I asked, signaling the waitress to pour a glass. "Same shit, but different story, Jim. I heard you got divorced." I nodded as the waitress placed the glass on the table. "Bring another pitcher, please." "This sucks, man," Chris complained. "What happened?" "She tried to switch and divorce me, but things turned against her and now she's trying to get me back." They all laughed and Jack said, "Ah, so you've decided to find a replacement before she gets her hooks into you again? Smart." I laughed. "No, I'm not going back, but I think it's time to get out of the game again." Alan smirked and said, "Maddie is single for the first time in our adult lives. Steve cheated on her and she kicked him to the curb last year." "No shit?" Maddie Ross was one of the it girls in high school, and I, and all the guys, had a crush on her. She dated Steve Clark all through high school and got knocked up before she graduated college. "She's here," Jack said slyly. "She and Heather Scott are playing a trivia game at the bar. They're sitting at the dartboard." My gaze darted across the room, and there she sat. Her black hair framed her beautiful face perfectly. She didn't seem to have aged a bit in the last 10 years. I thought about walking over to her to say hello, but I had no idea what I would say afterward. "Hey, since we're both divorced cheaters, do you want to grab a coffee?" I decided to do nothing. Jack must have read my mind. "Hey, Jim, I've been wanting to play trivia tonight for a while now. What do you say we go to the other side and get a table before it fills up?" I laughed and was about to chuckle when the others stood up. Chris said, "No one stands a chance against us. We are the kings of useless knowledge." I gave in to peer pressure and we found another table. It was time for another pitcher, so I called the waitress over and ordered a pitcher of golden goodness. Jack hummed and nodded toward the table where Heather and Maddie were sitting. I shook my head and asked the waitress, "Could you send a pitcher to the table with the blonde and black-haired lady?" "Sure," she said with a smirk. "Good luck." That got a laugh from the guys, and soon we were all laughing at how ridiculous I was being, trying to pretend I knew how to get a girl. I positioned myself at the table so I could see Maddie's desk. I was amazed at the way her eyes smiled when she laughed. She was still gorgeous. The waitress brought our pitcher, walked over to the ladies, set down their drinks and pointed in my direction. I smiled and raised my beer in an airy toast. Heather laughed and whispered in Maddie's ear as she responded to my air toast. She shook her head in denial of what Heather had said and turned away. Heather jabbed her finger at me, and that's when the guys started urging me to go and talk to them. I took a deep breath and stood up. I knew I needed to get back in the game, and I had the perfect opportunity to get my first strikeout, so I approached as calmly as possible. Of course, that meant I was shaking and my hands were sweating profusely. Before I could say anything stupid, Heather took pity on me. Jim Spellman, you're not doing a good job of buying drinks for the women's game. You should be delivering them yourself so they can thank you. I smiled as they giggled at me. God, I felt like a 16-year-old kid again. I'm sorry, Heather, I wasn't sure you'd remember me. It's been a while. Maddie, hi. Hi, Jim. Of course we remember you. No one forgets the cute guys they went to high school with. I must have blushed because they started giggling again. I thought you were married, Mr. Spellman. What would Mrs. Spellman say about that? Heather asked. I raised my bare left hand and said, divorced for over 6 months now. Sorry to hear that, Heather said, and Maddie sat up a little straighter. I see you're married, I said, pointing to the rock on her finger. Yes, for 5 years now. I married Kevin Carlson, and we have 3-year-old twin girls. Nice. I have a 10-year-old son and a newborn daughter. Maddie asked, a newborn? You said that? I interrupted her. Yes, she was pregnant with my baby when she left me for her lover. Maddie looked at me in amazement. Heather said, surely that must be some story. Well, that's probably best done at another time and place. I hear they have a trivia tonight? I hoped the change of subject was subtle enough. Yes, we never miss that event, Maddie replied brightly. Would you like to join us, or are your friends counting on you to lead them to victory? No, not at all. I decided to come today at the last minute. I didn't even know they were here. That makes sense then, Heather said. What's the matter? You didn't shave, Maddie said, making them both giggle again. I rubbed my cheek and said, I guess I'm a little unshaven. I thought I had a bad boy charm. This time they laughed. Maddie said, you can't be a bad boy in stylish clothes. They kept laughing and I said, sorry. I stepped back to grab a beer from another table. The guys threatened me with their fists and Jack said, go get it, Tiger, which caused the others to laugh. They were probably hoping I'd fail and then they'd have another entertainment for the evening. Turning around, I saw the girls arguing. I walked back over and heard Heather reprimanding Maddie for chasing me away. I smiled inwardly, surprising them by sitting down in an empty chair. Miss me? They turned and smiled at the same time. Holy shit, Maddie was beautiful. It was all I could do not to look into her shining eyes. Maddie smirked and said, don't choke tonight, we're counting on you to win. I'll do my best not to screw up. After hours of playing trivia, we were 2 points ahead of a table of seniors who looked like college professors. The host asked the last question and announced it was worth 5 points. This 1977 album contains the hits She's Always a Woman and Just the Way You Are. I laughed and the ladies looked at each other perplexed. I took a piece of paper, wrote The Stranger, and walked over to the presenter. Returning to the table, I winked at the professors. That was the easiest question of the entire evening, I said, taking a sip. Maybe for you, Maddie said. I don't even think I've ever heard those songs. Heather laughed and said, at least I know they're Billy Joel songs. Don't worry, ladies. I'm a huge fan of his and this is one of my favorite albums. And then the host announced the answer and us as the winners. We screamed and accepted the grand prize, a $50 gift certificate to the bar we were at. I let the ladies take it to pay the bill, which included the food. Maddie said, well, I'm turning into a pumpkin. My babysitter doesn't want to stay until 12. I stood next to them and asked, can I walk you out? They smiled and said in unison, please. As we walked, I was surprised when Maddie took my hand. I looked up at her and I swear her eyes sparkled. I felt on top of the world and hoped she would agree to go out with me. Well, here we are, Heather said. I didn't let go of Maddie's hand, but brought it up to my lips for a kiss, and then felt like a chump for doing so. Maddie, I'd like to see you again. Can I have your number? It would be my pleasure, Jim. She took the phone I held out to her and dialed her number. Saturdays and Sundays before noon are good for me. Sundays we're having dinner with my parents. Great, I smiled. How about we have dinner together on Saturday and then come back here for the trivia? We have a title to defend. Heather laughed and said, I'm still coming, you two. That made us laugh, and I kissed Maddie on the cheek. Good night, Maddie. Heather, drive carefully. I'm fine. I nodded and opened the door for Maddie. Watching the ladies drive away made me feel good. and I hoped the feeling would last. Monday morning, I went back to work. At 9 o'clock, I took a break to call my lawyer and inform him of Carrie's threat. He said, "Jim, don't sweat it. Her lawyer just faxed over a signed amendment to the divorce decree. She agreed to joint custody and the visitation schedule we set up. I'll be sending the original by courier soon, and once it's filed, you'll be all set. Congratulations." I was stunned. When I got home that evening, she was sitting on the steps with Jimmy and Allison. "What's this all about?" I asked. "Hey, man. I brought you dinner to help with Jimmy for the last week or so, and I apologized." I saw the casserole dish behind her back and smiled. "Tuna casserole? Of course. She's always been your favorite dish. I hope that hasn't changed." "I'm looking forward to her. I can't make her the same no matter how hard I try." "You should have called me. I could have—" She realized her words and froze. "I'm sorry. I guess you couldn't have called me." "Well, let's go inside before the chipmunks want their share," I said. "Nah, nah." She set the carrier down on the carpet and I went to get Allison. "Oh, no, you don't. I know how sweaty and dirty you are when you get home. Go take a shower. When you're done, you can hold her in your arms for as long as she'll let you." Sweaty and dirty. Yeah, she was serious about that monkey shit. I silently prayed that God would give me the strength to stand my ground. Every time I saw her, my love for her died even more. The conversation at dinner was light, and after dinner she told Jimmy to go play in his room while we talked. She handed Allison to me, and although she was cranky, she didn't cry. Newborn babies are pretty boring. They don't know how to do anything, and they hold their head up. I always confuse that with Jimmy, and I had to keep reminding her of it. I saw that Carrie was about to say something to me, and I said, "I'm holding her head up." She laughed and replied, "10 years later, it's still a force of habit." I sighed and asked, "So what does it all mean?" I knew she had signed the agreement, but I wasn't sure if she knew I knew it. I agreed to the visitation and child support agreements. She lowered her head, scrutinizing the stain on the carpet. "What happened to—" "Please don't remind me. I overreacted by saying that, and I would never do that to you. I'm just so desperate to get you back that I'd do anything. I wish you would have treated me like that before you threw me away. I feel like you don't want me back. You need me now that your lover has faded away. I'm sorry, Carrie. I'm so sorry, I just can't trust you anymore." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I corrected Allison and lifted her up to stroke her cheek. "Can't we at least stay friends? For Jimmy's sake?" Allison won't know the difference, of course, but with Greg gone, Jimmy thinks we should be together again. He's just a kid and has no idea how much pain you've caused me. Not only did you cheat on me, you dumped me and then put that shitty restraining order on me just because your best man told you to. I was never a danger to you or Jimmy. Him? Definitely, but not to you, and you knew it. You put me in a hellish prison with no hope of seeing the only light in my life. You crushed my soul, and you don't seem to care. Jim, No. Don't give me a phony, heartless apology right now. You're in the most desperate position of your life, and that goes without saying. Are you going to say I brought you into his arms because I've been working hard and I'm tired? Fine, but think about this. For his seduction to work, you had to be receptive to him. You never told me I was pushing you away. You never told me I was in danger of losing you. No. You chose to fall for his bullshit. Jesus, Carrie, no one liked the guy. And suddenly you succumbed to some irresistible charm he supposedly possessed? It doesn't make sense." She cried, and Allison fussed. "Carrie, I think you wanted to cheat on me and you chose him because no one would have suspected it. Later, when you were pregnant, you had a choice, him or me, and you chose him. You'll never convince me that you weren't trying to change. I won't believe that. Jim, we don't have to talk about this anymore. I'm sorry for everything. You'll never understand how sorry I am, and I accept that it's my fault. Can't we just try to patch things up for their own good?" I leaned back, and thankfully Allison calmed down. "We can be friends, but I'll never take you back." "I know." After Carrie and my kids left, I texted Maddie. "Hi, I didn't want you to forget me. I'm looking forward to Saturday." There was no reply for a while, and I found myself pacing nervously around the room, glancing at my phone every few seconds. I hoped I hadn't overdone it by texting her. I knew I was new to dating. I had no idea how to date my mother. When would I meet her kids? When would our children meet? Would they meet? Is it a bad sign if she won't introduce me to her child? My mind was a mess, and I hadn't even had my first date with her yet. 10 agonizing minutes later, I got the call. Relief swept over me when I saw it was her. Hi, Maddie. Hi yourself, handsome. I don't really like texting. I like talking. Oh, sorry. What are you doing? Just giving my baby girl a bath. Baby? I heard you had an older child, but I didn't know about the youngest. Yeah, I have 3 of them. 11, 7, and 3. That won't scare you, will it? You could hear the fear in her voice. I laughed and said, No, I love children. You know I have 2 myself. Yeah, our older ones go to school together. Really? That's amazing to hear. I don't remember seeing you 2 at school events. I used to have a pretty crappy schedule. I only recently started working first shift. For a long time, I worked second shift. At the hospital, huh? I remembered her telling me she was a CQA can or CNA, something like that. That's what ruined my marriage. Or rather, it was ruined by my cheating ex-bastard, but he blamed it on my shift at work. I'm sorry about that. It's similar to what my wife said. I worked too hard and was too tired or in a bad mood. Blah, blah, blah. We laughed together until she said, That's all nonsense. They cheat and they need to blame it on everyone but themselves and their selfish behavior. Do you know how many times I could scratch an itch with anyone I picked up on the street? But I've never done it. I can't do that to my partner. Cheaters don't have that moral high ground. They find a way to justify what they want and get what they want, regardless of anyone's feelings or the vows they made. Yes, she keeps trying to get me back. I've had her, my son, and her parents all ganging up on me. I think it's finally gotten to them that I'm the victim in this story. We are the victims, aren't we? You haven't had any therapy or counseling, have you? No, have you? Yes, it helped a lot. I'll give you my boyfriend's name. He really helped me get past the, wow, that's me feeling. You're so much further along than I am. At least you realized you need to move on. I sat at home like a prison until I got it into my head that I needed to get back into the world of the living, both for my kids and for myself. I laughed and said, Well, you and I are right for each other. She laughed and replied, That's for sure. That's why I've been looking forward to Saturday ever since you kissed me on the cheek. Oh shit, I have to go. Something's happened to my 3-year-old daughter. She's crying. Sure, I'll talk to you soon. I smiled and put my phone down on the table. I loved the sense of hope I felt in that moment. Saturday morning, I called my sister. Hi, Jim, she answered cheerfully. All right, then. Jenny, do you have some time this morning to go shopping with me? I need to update my closet. Oh shit, you have a date? I laughed. Yeah, I have a date with Maddie Clark tonight. Maddie Ross? Wow, she's gorgeous. I heard Steve really messed up her life when he cheated on her. Called her a frigid bitch. I hope that's not true. Don't be an ass, big brother. I'm free all day. Do you want to meet me for lunch at the mall and then we can go shopping? That sounds good. Let's meet at the Red Robin at noon. Next chapter. Mom is really excited to be a grandmother again. She just adores Allison, Jenny said as she sat down at a table in the restaurant. Yeah, she visits her at Jane's a lot. I know Carrie has left her with her mom a couple of times too. And how are you coping with all this? Better. Carrie's finally stopped fighting back and I love that girl. She nodded and we placed our order. So you're continuing your relationship with Maddie. She's always been attractive, but not arrogant like some of the other hotties. I think you two would be good together. That's funny. I went on a date last week just to see what it was like to go out on my own. I never imagined I'd find someone that night. It's almost too much. I really expected her to blow me off. Well, just be yourself. If you try to impress her or fake it, she'll smell it right away and you'll blow it. You're a great guy that any girl would want, so use that to your advantage. Thanks. I'm afraid I don't know how to date. What do people do these days? She laughed and said, Brother, Maddie is your age. It's not like dating a 20-year-old. You do the same thing you did with Carrie. A movie, dinner. And then you can take her to a country bar and dance the night away. She'd love all that. You're right. I hadn't thought of it that way. Perhaps I'm not as ignorant as I thought I was. No, you're still very ignorant. She laughed when I shook my head. That evening, I walked down the sidewalk to Maddie's house. A boy, who I realized was her son, was playing basketball in the driveway, and he tossed me the ball when I caught his eye. I dropped the flowers I was carrying to catch the ball, and he laughed. Apparently, he didn't like the flowers. I made the throw and missed, which made him laugh even harder. "Keep laughing, kid," I said with a smile. "What's your mom going to do when she sees the condition her flowers are in?" He looked at the flowers and ran over to them. "They're not broken, are they? She loves flowers." "Roses are pretty tough, you're lucky. I'm Jim." "Hi, I'm David. Please don't tell Mom I made you drop them." "I won't tell her this time." "Thanks," he said with a smile. "Come on in. I'll tell her you're here." I followed him up the steps and into the house. I smiled when I saw the living room set up for a sleepover, pillows and blankets on the floor, a stack of DVDs in front of the TV. As he ran up the steps, a 3-year-old girl appeared from around the corner with a sippy cup in her hands. She froze, screamed, and ran toward the stairs. David and the 7-year-old met her at the foot of the stairs, and he picked her up in his arms. "I'm sorry, she doesn't like strangers and you scared her," David said quietly. "I see you've met the clan," Maddie said as she walked down the stairs. She looked stunning, dressed in a long skirt and loose blouse. She stopped and took the girl from David. "This is David." She looked at him and continued, "You go to school with his son Jimmy." "Jimmy Spellman?" She nodded. "Cool," he said and bounced to the side. "This is my darling daughter Samantha." She touched the middle child's head. "You can call me Sammy like everyone else," she said reproachfully. "It's nice to meet you, Sammy." "And this little fool is Bella. You'll have to let her get used to you. She doesn't really like meeting new people, from what I hear. You've already figured that out." I wiggled my fingers, and the little girl ducked her head into Maddie's chest. "Sorry, my mom is running a few minutes late. She's sleeping over tonight," she said, winking at me. I wondered if I would have to go to bed alone. "No problem. We still have plenty of time. How about a beer while we wait? Or would you like a glass of wine?" "Beer would be fine, thanks," I said, as she sat the girl down, who immediately ran up the stairs. Sammy laughed as she picked up the abandoned sippy cup and followed her sister upstairs. "You have a beautiful family," I said as she handed me a beer. "Thanks. They can be fidgety, especially David, but they're good kids." I nodded and sat down on the couch, pulling my doll closer to me. If there's one thing that comes with having kids, it's that no matter how well you keep your house clean, there's always someone to clutter it up. "So you and Steve got married, huh? That's not surprising. You were inseparable in high school." She laughed and replied, "We were together because we were part of a group and everyone broke up into couples. We were the only ones who lasted until graduation, and that was only because I was comfortable with him and didn't know any better. When I got pregnant with David, we did what some would call the right thing and got married. It wasn't anything like a shotgun blast, but we had never loved each other like that. I think it was doomed from the start." I nodded and sipped my beer. I looked at my watch and she asked, "Do we have an order we're going to be late for?" "We're not going to be late. I didn't mean to—" She interrupted me. "You don't have to be so nervous. I've been looking forward to this all week." She smiled that bright smile that made her eyes sparkle and my boxers get even tighter. "Me too," I admitted. "I fully expected you to take me down last week. I'm glad that didn't happen." "There wasn't really any chance of that. I knew you were a good kid back in high school, and unless you've turned into a total asshole since then, I was going to give you a chance. I'm glad you didn't turn into an asshole." We laughed together, and then her front door opened. "Sorry I'm late." "Hi, Mom. Don't worry," Maddie said with a smile. "Mom, this is Jim Spellman. We went to middle school together." Mrs. Ross smiled and said, "Nice to meet you, Jim. Be nice to my favorite daughter, or I'll find you." I laughed and said, "I thought it was my father who was supposed to warn me." She frowned and replied, "I'm afraid my John died last year." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't worry about it, young man. Just have a good time, but not too good." We laughed again, and I realized I liked her mom. "No, we should get going, Mom," Maddie said, reaching for my hand. "The popcorn is on the counter. David knows how to use the machine to make it, and I ordered the pizza on the app and it'll be delivered in an hour. Don't wait." She kissed her children goodbye and we left. Mrs. Ross cackled as we walked out the door. Next chapter. As we sat down at a table at the steakhouse, the unthinkable happened. 2 tables away from us sat Dan and Jane. I wanted to run out the door before they saw me, but Maddie saw the fear in my eyes. What's wrong, Jim? I sighed, inviting her to sit in the chair. My in-laws are sitting 2 tables to your left. She looked over there, and as soon as she did, they saw us. And I couldn't predict their reaction to seeing me on a date, but I needn't have worried. They both smiled widely and walked over to us. Hey, Jim. Nice to see you out and about. Who's the hottie? Dan asked with a grinning Jane holding his hand. Hey, guys, this is my date, Maddie. Maddie, these are my in-laws, Dan and Jane. Maddie, Jane began, you have a keeper. Don't lose it like my stupid daughter did. Maddie looked at her like a deer in the headlights. Well, okay. I don't know what to say. Dan laughed and said, Don't say anything. Just enjoy the evening. It was nice meeting you. He patted me on the back and they went back to their table. Well, that was something, she said. Yeah, they're good people. When Carrie tried to bluff that she'd take my kids if I didn't take her back, they pounced on her. Do you really believe that was a bluff? She asked. Not 100%. I think she had an option and she let it out of her mouth in desperation without thinking. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm moving on with my life and she signed a custody agreement. She took my hand and said, Good. Don't ever forget what she put you through. But for the sake of the baby, get along with her. They will notice if you fight all the time. Don't trust her. I nodded, and as the waitress approached, I asked her to bring a couple desserts for Dan and Jane. We walked into the bar and found Heather holding our table. Jack and the guys were there again and gave me a thumbs up when they saw that I made Maddie laugh. God, I loved her laugh. So, Heather began, where did you go for dinner? To Chop House, Maddie replied. You won't believe this, but his ex-in-laws were there and came over to our table. Oh shit, what did you do? Nothing. They were nice and told me not to let him go like their stupid daughter did. Wow, a first date for the record book. Jim, are you ready to defend our title? I sure am. I see the professors are back. I looked across the table at them. One of them nodded, and the other ran his thumb across my throat as if to say I was a dead man. I liked good crappy sign language. Well, we got lucky with Billy Joel's question at the end. We need to take a bigger hit tonight, Maddie said, pushing me in the shoulder. No problem, ladies. We can handle it. And we did manage. By the last question, we were winning by a 10-point margin. The host tried to cheat and made the last question 12th, but it was a question about some country and western singer that Heather really liked. Walking Heather to the car, Maddie and I put our arms around each other's waists. She felt so good in my arms that I didn't want to let her go, and I hoped that what I was feeling would last a long time. Good night, guys, Heather said as she hugged Maddie, and then pressed herself against me in surprise. Drive safe, sweetie, Maddie said. As we watched her drive away, Maddie said, It's still early and you have 2 options. 1, you can take me back to the house and we can talk and continue to get to know each other better. Or you can take me back to your house and we can get to know each other better in a more fun environment. I'm not an idiot. I decided to take her back to my house. Next chapter. Can I offer you a glass of wine? I have red and white or beer, I asked as we settled into my living room. White would be nice. It's chilled. Sure. It's not like I'm a savage. She laughed and took off her shoes, and I went to get the bottle of wine I'd bought, hoping to be in the situation I was in. Here you go, Mads. My favorite Pinot Grigio for my favorite girl. Mads? She asked with a smirk. What, too early for a pet name? No, not at all. I like it. My dad used to call me Mads when I was little. Oh, Stop being nervous, it's all right. My dad would have liked you. I set down my glass and watched as she took a big sip from hers and then set it down as well. I made a grand gesture, reaching out and putting my arms around her shoulders. Oh, slick move, Ace, she laughed. Don't try too hard, sweetheart. I've been waiting to find a man like you ever since I got out of prison. Now that I've found you, I'm looking forward to dessert. We kissed that time, but no more. As if straight out of a dating textbook, we waited until our third date before we took things to the next level. After a romantic dinner at a fancy restaurant she had chosen, we ended up at my house. I poured her a glass of wine and we sat on my couch. Later she said, Jim, I'd like you to show me your bedroom. Thoughts of the last year of my life flashed through my mind. The affair, the divorce, the loss and return of my son, the birth of my daughter. Now to all this drama I could add my Maddie. I knew I would never let her go. We were two broken souls that could only be put back together with glue. I knew it was too soon to think long-term, but I knew I wasn't going to mess it up. Carrie had told me where I had gone wrong in my relationship with her, and I would correct those mistakes. Maddie will become a priority along with my kids and then work. I'll be studying. As I drifted into a contented slumber, I could have sworn I heard her whisper, "I love you too." Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.